listeners, back to the Marvelous Mind podcast. Today I'm joined with Kendall. Today we've got quite an interesting conversation. We'll be talking a bit about the spirituality, psychological healing, and particularly in the context of trauma. Kendall himself is a podcast host as well as a spiritual integration and life coach. And Kendall, would you like to sort of offer some initial sort of details about yourself, where you sort of come to this topic?
Yeah. Thanks so much for having me on. I appreciate the opportunity. You mentioned I have my own podcast, so it's cool and different for me to be in the guest chair. I really appreciate that. It's funny. I think, doing podcasts for so long, you get really comfortable and used to it. But now as a guest, I feel a little more nervous. So that's funny.
No, I feel the same way as a host.
Yeah. So, a little bit about myself. I'm in Texas in the U.S. and I grew up Christian. I was always really interested in like reading and truth and theology and and I was always very curious, and so that led me to just continue to try to find the truth, try to understand the universe and God and everything like that. Um, and now I'm a spiritual life coach to help people along kind of the same journey that I've been through. And just those who really want to grow and, not just make external changes to their life, but also do the deep inner work, which actually is the root of how we change and how we make external changes. So that's a
Yeah,
little basic background.
I sort of I resonate strongly with that sort of innate desire for like truth, for being curious about the world. Like, we're all sort of thrust in, you're thinking what is going on, let's try and figure things out. And I guess my own personal background is a little bit different, because I was, neither of my parents were particularly religious. I mean, in the UK, for example, we're quite a very secular kind of atheistic kind of culture, where sort of, I mean, I went to sort of a Church of England primary school,
Mm.
but it was, I was never particularly sort of religiously inclined. I mean, in fact, when I got to my like early teenage years, I was sort of almost quite critical of religion. Sort of, that edgy sort of teenage phase of like
Right.
reading people like Sam Harris, Richard Dawkins,
Mm-hmm.
Christopher Hitchens, and whatnot. And I sort of my journey into sort of more spiritual contemplation, sort of, it came, I mean, first through sort of experimenting with psychedelic compounds and stuff, and that really sort of gives you a very strong experiential transformation where you're like, oh, actually reality is kind of a mystery. Science can't explain everything. And I think that sort of put me down a sort of a path of like meditation, sort of looking inwards to the source, which is what we all are. And that took me down the path of sort of thinking about Eastern philosophies, various sort of mystical traditions and stuff like that. And then you sort of come full circle to appreciating the sort of the wonder of the now, kind of. And I think it's interesting how you have sort of your own Christian background, and I come from an irreligious background. We all almost sort of converge on a similar sort of point, I suppose. But yeah, if you got any thoughts, I think you're frozen a bit. Sorry guys, minor technical difficulties. Kendall had an electricity outage due to someone running to a pole, but we've got it set up again. So we're going to fly back into it. I was just left off where I was speaking about my own sort of journey towards spirituality, from atheism through psychedelics to sort of then going on to more sort of deeper contemplations and whatnot. I suppose, Kendall, would you like to sort of talk a bit about your own sort of, journey with well, from your own Christian background, and
Hmm.
obviously, and yeah, you talk a
Yeah.
bit about. I remember, yeah, I'll let you go. Sorry.
Yeah, great. I think it's funny. It's cool to see how we came from like opposite spectrums. You from very atheistic, and it's kind of also a product of our backgrounds of where we're from. From what I hear, um, Europe is pretty, secular, atheist, whatever you want to call it. And where I live is very, very Christian, very religious. We call it the Bible Belt here in
Mm,
the
yeah.
south part of North America. Um, yeah, so yeah, I grew up in that, and I was very religious. I read the Bible, and I read the New Testament part a couple times, and I went to church all the time. Went to church camp. Um, listened to a lot of Christian music. It was very insular in a way.
Mm,
But I think just being a big reader, that was probably opening up my mind to a wider world. And then, of course, just being curious, that always helped. And then college kind of opened up more. Uh, in college, I started my senior year of college, I started going to a counselor. And the first thing he taught me, like you mentioned, is meditation. And so that was really great. Really great to see that I'm not my thoughts and my emotions, then I can observe those, and then I can start to have some control and some relief from those intense, anxious or depressing symptoms. Um, and then I went to this Christian apologetics camp. I don't know if you've heard of the word apologetics.
yeah, it's where you're sort of arguing for your faith and
Yeah,
against
yeah,
criticism.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of funny how they try to use science, but then whenever it doesn't support the narrative, then they say science, you can't trust science, and they have their bias. And so it's kind
Yeah,
of
yeah.
there's a lot of circular arguments in there. I appreciate the attempt to go more in depth, and I think it was a step in my journey. um yeah, it was a step in my journey, and it was helpful, but also limiting. So I'm glad that soon after I went to that camp, I went to grad school. And even though I went to a Christian grad school, it was funny actually. My One of my professors in my English class, it was called the class was called Bible's Literature, and he was from England. And so
Mm,
maybe that's why it was more open or whatever. But it was kind of examining how, just like any book, you have to examine the genre, and how you, and which genre it is determines how you read it, whether you read it historically, literally, symbolically, whatever. And so, yeah, I was uncomfortable seeing the Bible in a new light, but I couldn't deny that analysis, because that's how you learn in English. That's what makes sense. And so it made me really start to think about my faith. But also in grad school, I think um, I started realizing how I love the intellectual um, pursuit and all the really smart people there, but how imbalanced it was. That the emotional and also the experiential was kind of put off to the side. And um, those are some elitism and language that you could. I'm like, they could say things a lot simpler, but they want to sound smart or whatever. Have
mm,
this like special language that only the intellectuals can understand. And I was also at that point starting to get more interested in Eastern way of living and thinking, in the sense that Western was very specialized in the different fields, but Eastern was very holistic, um, and cared about the experiential and the emotional and everything together, and that was really resonating with me. Also, um, there's different denominations within Christianity, and I grew up in Christianity that was not very didn't emphasize the Holy Spirit and what we call the gifts of the Spirit. So like prophecy or healing or these kind of miraculous things. And so I was like, that's part of Christianity too. Like what's going on there? And also I just felt that my faith was kind of stale. I wasn't really feeling it emotionally and experientially and like relationally. Um, and so I was starting to get into what we call that charismatic Christianity, and the gifts, the spirit, all that stuff.
Mm.
And also was just struggling because growing up, I had gotten bullied a lot. My parents had high expectations on me. I had a lot of shame and self-doubt, and kind of this picture perspective of God is being very I had to perform. I had to be this certain way for him to be happy with me. um, but I was struggling in grad school. I had a lot of anxiety, a lot of loneliness. Grad school is definitely not easy on your mental health, and it's not geared towards social aspects and even mental health and stuff like that. And I was away from my family for the first time. Was about 6 hours away, and so yeah, I was struggling, and so my second year, I vowed that I would really work on my mental, emotional, spiritual health. So I was meditating, I was praying, I was reading the Bible, I was listening to Christian music, I was um, trying to examine my thoughts and think positively throughout the day, all these things. Um, and so I was also trying to change the way I uh, did my homework, in the sense that not waiting till last moment, procrastinating, then like panic doing my homework. You may be
Mm.
familiar with that.
Oh, yeah, definitely,
Um,
definitely.
and so I successfully changed that, but then I hadn't yet replaced it with a positive narrative of why I should do my homework, and that energy to do it. So then I was like, oh crap, what do I do now? It
Mm.
was funny. Um, but at the end of the semester, I've been talking to this girl, wasn't really working out. I still felt really discouraged because I was like, I did all this work, I've been trying so hard. Um, but also, one thing, growing up, when I thought about being an adult and being successful, I kind of just saw like this blackness. Like I couldn't envision it, I couldn't see it. I was just scared that it was going to have some kind of collapse, that I wouldn't be able to do it. And so that was still kind of there in my mind. And so that was just, yeah, it was tough. It was kind of, it's like I've been trying so hard, but I still feel so far behind. But
Mm.
one of my friends sent me this article on trauma, and it talked about how, in order to heal trauma, you have to go back into the past and experience it again, seeing it from a new perspective, a new light, and seeing what you could gain from it, the gold from that. And that was really intriguing to me. And I just kept reading this website, and I got into this kind of flow state, and I read it from 8 in the morning to like 4:30 at night. And
Mm.
when you have like an epiphany in your head, like, oh, this makes sense. You get that like jolt of
Yeah.
electricity in your body. That
Mm.
kept happening to me over and over again. So by 4:30, when I realized it was super late and I should go to sleep, I was just buzzing with all this energy. And
Mm.
so I go up to my room and I start doing this body scan meditation to kind of calm down and go to sleep. But I think I connected all the energy in my head with my body, and I just started shaking uncontrollably. And it was just the biggest feeling of love, joy, peace, ecstasy. Um, and in my head at the time, I thought I heard God tell me, like, you are a prophet, you're to be my voice. And I was just like, what in the world? Like,
Mm.
wow. And
God.
it was just amazing. I went to sleep. I've been taking Adderall for ADHD. I was feeling amazing when I woke up. I just went off of that cold turkey. I was kind of like flying high for the next month. I had a lot of synchronicities. I was feeling all this energy in my body. I was talking to a lot of people. Um, I was seeing God in everything and everyone. I had these insights. Something I was like, I wrote a graph about time and space. I had this lucid dream at one point of flying. Um,
Mm.
I had thoughts about reincarnation, about like dimensions, stuff that I had never really gotten into or thought about before. It just kind of came out of nowhere.
Mm.
But I didn't really have a context, again, because I had never gotten into these things. And so it took me a lot later in my journey, when I started my spiritual journey, to kind of connect the dots of what was happening and making more sense of that, I guess. But eventually, at the end of the month, I went back to grad school. I had a month-long winter break from school, and I was feeling so good. I wasn't sleeping a lot, wasn't eating a lot, but then I got kind of more unmoored from reality and kind of out of it. And so my
Mm.
roommate took me to the hospital, and I got put in the psych ward. They said I had bipolar one. They put me on medicine for that, and then I kind of crashed. I didn't have that connection, that energy, those feelings before, and I was like, "What happened? I don't know." This is what the doctors are saying. My parents are agreeing with them, um, and also my beliefs kind of all went away. I couldn't really relate to the Christianity I'd grown up with. I couldn't read the Bible. I couldn't pray. I couldn't go to church. It just didn't connect with me. It didn't resonate. But I didn't have any intellectual understanding of what had happened. Um, so I was just kind of like in this emotional deconstruction, really. And I didn't even know that word at the time, and I didn't understand that it was a movement that a lot of Christians were having. And I'm not sure. I'm sure it's not like limited to Christians, but yeah. And so I kind of went through this dark night of the soul for 5 years, and I was just trying to get back on my feet, just trying to, get a job and support myself, and just focus on that. Um, Eventually, at one point, I didn't have a job and I ran out of money, and so I went off of my meds. And on the meds, life was very gray. I couldn't really feel my emotions. I tried to go to therapy for a little bit, but it didn't really do anything for me because I couldn't really feel into myself and make any
Mm.
headway. Um,
What sort
so
of
yeah, I went off of
medication? Sorry, out of
yeah. It
curiosity.
was lithium for bipolar one.
Ah, I see. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, went off of medicine, started getting better, and then I eventually decided to go to grad school for counseling. And at the same time, I read this book on near death experiences, and it really connected with my own journey and a lot of things I had intuited, uh, about like dimensions and reincarnation, energy and God and everything, and kind of this universal perspective, beyond religion to the spirituality kind of thing.
Mm.
Um, and so, yeah, I began a spiritual journey. I found a lot of people that could relate, either had similar experiences or, were on the spiritual journey themselves and could help me make sense of things. I read a lot of books, listened to a lot of podcasts. Um, and yeah, I just kind of started connecting the dots of what had happened in my journey. I learned about Kundalini awakening, and that's probably what had happened to me. But there's many other words for it, like oneness experience or a mystical experience. A lot of Christian mystics and mystics in general having
Mm.
these experiences, and I know people in psychedelics or meditation can also have similar experiences. So it's really cool to, yeah, connect these dots. And through that journey, I figured out more about the mental health field and, its strengths, but also its shortcomings, and kind of who I was and what I believed. And just the journey took me away from counseling and into coaching. And so, yeah, again, now I'm, part of my coaching is a spiritual integration, which is helping other people who've had powerful spiritual experiences, help them make sense of that, help them ground back down. Because those experiences can really take you into this oneness experience, but then it's hard to focus and make sense of and live in your everyday normal physical world. And so
Mm.
what does that experience mean for you? How do you live that out day to day, and where do you go from here? What makes sense to you? Finding new meaning and purpose in life. um, yeah, that's let's try the short version of my
No,
story.
I mean, there's a lot. There's a lot there, and yeah, I sort of I resonate with certain parts, particularly the spiritual ecstasy, the bliss of those
Mm.
sort of those mystical kind of states of oneness where you feel where you realize on a very deep experiential level that you are everyone and everything and
Mm.
simultaneously nothing as well
Mm-hmm.
and and yeah, particularly yeah, vibrationally feeling your whole body sort of convulsing and yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I've had sort of a number of those sort of experiences, both like with and without sort of psychedelics, and I've likewise encountered like the difficulty of sort of reintegrating back into sort of like normal day-to-day life and being able to like sort of stay grounded, communicate with other people, communicate with yourself, and yeah, and yeah, and so and I as well sort of like stumbled through sort of a dark night of the soul period after having those sort of like mystical kind of states where I got heavily lost in sort of addictions. Like, I mean,
Mm.
I've always had a propensity towards sort of hyperfixating on stuff that feels good, and like
Mm.
I've always been sort of driven by like curiosity, even towards truth, and that probably took me down, the whole psychedelic sort of path, and like I was sort of, looking back, I was sort of young, immature, perhaps too adventurous, kind of going into those
Mm.
sort of dimensions, and particularly without really much guidance other than sort of from myself and the internet, which I wouldn't recommend to anyone. I haven't, I've come away from it, unscathed, but I can definitely see how, um, and I think this is even a risk even with meditation, particularly the way it's sort of introduced to people. I think meditation is a very good thing to be mindful of one's thoughts, but there's very rarely the sort of people are told that okay, when you meditate, you might have these sort of
Right.
awakening Kundalini type
Mm-hmm.
experiences. For certain individuals who are like predisposed to it, it can happen very spontaneously, and you'll have these sort of strange bodily sensations. Energies rippling
Mm.
up and down your spine to your crown. You're like, what the fuck is going on? Am I dying or whatever? And that's certainly like when I've had sort of those. Because I mean, yeah, I mean, you mentioned you have that period where you were sort of meditating, praying regularly, and whatnot. And I likewise like had a sort of a period where I was doing. It was I think during my second year of university where I was doing like these 30, 40 minute sit meditations, like daily, pretty much, and sort of that was an interesting period where I would occasionally have these sort of mildly sort of psychic experiences of like closed eyes, sort of closed eye visuals or certain like
Mm.
shapes of like lights and
Mm-hmm.
whatnot, and you're sort of the way I sort of interpreted it is that I was sort of becoming more sort of acquainted with my own sort of experiential energies, I suppose, and like yeah, you can do this in a variety of ways. Like body scans is where you're taking your attention and you're sort of can diffuse it through your body to think what's going on your left big toe and whatnot, and scanning up your body and stuff. But I would say like even now, my current stage in life, I don't tend to do sort of sit meditations anymore. More because sort of I almost find it too experientially intense, kind of
Mm.
sometimes to sort of to sit back. I'll sort of immediately go back to that place of sort of where I just feel stretched out, kind of, and I don't yeah, and I think, and even when I've sort of, I mean, I don't really experiment too regularly with psychedelics nowadays. Kind of, there's a whole sort of, I kind of reminded of this sort of quote from Alan Watts, which is like when you get the message, kind of hang up the phone, kind of,
Mm.
and
Right.
I don't seem to, yeah, beyond that sort of initial kind of non-dual kind of realization, kind of where you recognize you are sort of a pattern that's kind of continuous with everything around you. Um, it's I don't know. Yeah, there's that sudden kind of like realization of that Kundalini awakening, but then I think there is still a whole process of after that the whole work
Mm.
of realigning and 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 like yeah, like I think we both sort of had sort of similar experiences with that initial kind of state of ecstasy and bliss, and then you think, oh, is this going to continue forever? And then
Mm-hmm.
you sort of become ungrounded, you fall into sort of these disruptive kind of patterns and whatnot, and
Mm-hmm.
but then you can sort of realign and come back to a sort of state of comfortable equilibrium, and but yeah, and I'll just sort of like ask you a bit more about sort of your dark night of the soul, and what was it like sort of when you're on your medications and you feel like you
Mm.
sort of seemingly lost touch with the source, like what was that experientially like for you?
Yeah. It I think all the shame from growing up and feeling like there's something wrong with me. I'm different from the rest of society, from other people. Um, and that kind of carries on to, how I say like your relationship with God or the universe or the energy, Um, you're like, what's wrong with me that I've lost this? There must be something I did, something wrong, or during that time, I was like, is God just like the laws of nature, just the patterns of the universe? I don't know. It was just kind of this impersonal pantheism view of God, like God is the universe,
Mm,
and um yeah, I think that after that experience, it's addicted. You want it back.
mm,
It's amazing.
yeah.
It's addicting, so you want that back. But I think one thing was I was kind of scared because I was like, well, everyone else is saying this is bipolar, and now that's mania, so that's bad. You don't want to be there, and I,
Mm,
I will be unmoored, and I can't control it, and it'll ruin my life. So
mm,
when I started my spiritual journey again, and I started meditating again, I started feeling energy in my body again. I started having some shaking and stuff like that, and it was scary to me because I'm like, oh, am I gonna go back to that? Um, but then I just realized, and doing some research that the best way I can understand it is that you have these tight points, these blocks, these traumas in your body. The body keeps the score,
mm,
and the energy is just trying to run freely up and down your spine through your body, and when it encounters blocks and your body shakes to release that. You can see animals in the wild, like whenever they have fear from like a predator maybe or something like that, they'll shake. They're shaking off that energy. So it's just a natural thing your body does to help heal, shake off, break through these blocks. And so not seeing it as a bad thing. And I started to welcome. And I've discovered that the more I've grown and healed, the less shaking I do because it's just running more freely through my body.
mm,
Um, so that's really nice. So yeah, and again, I think that until I started my spiritual journey and got some context and other people's perspectives, and that, hey, this isn't just a me thing, this is something other people have experienced. Again, just like with my shame, oh, other people, that's actually what spurred on my awakening, was reading that article on trauma and then reading about all these people who've also gone through really hard things and are talking about it. And I was like, oh, these are amazing authors, inventors, scientists, whatever, and they're going through the same things I have. So it kind of normalizes my own experiences and helps mitigate that shame. Like I'm not so crazy or different or something so wrong with me. It's like this is a normal human experience, normal human emotions and thoughts that go through your mind and your experience, and so it's okay. Don't You shouldn't be ashamed about that. And so that is a really healing thing. And so again, seeing that other people are going through these experiences as well as me, oh, it's not just you, you're not crazy, this is a normal thing, And maybe there was some mental illness stuff going on, but also there was a spiritual experience that other people have had, and it's a great thing. And so there's things to learn from that. So what's going on there? And that kind of broke me out of that dark night of the soul.
Yeah, I think especially with like conversations about mental illness and the sort of the destigmatization of it, I think it is, particularly that shame component. Many people feel sort of shame and alienation,
Mm,
loneliness for thinking that they're different, and they don't understand the world, and the world doesn't understand them, and they feel this sort of this immense sort of like shame for not being able to sort of integrate with the sort of the normal reality. Like yeah, I've experienced my a fair bit of that shame, that sort of
mm,
social confusion, especially particularly within my own sort of context. I sort of lived most of my life with sort of like undiagnosed like autism, and it was only really towards the end of my like recently where I started thinking back on my own childhood memories, my own experiences with like schooling and education, social confusion. I've always had the thought, that I'm a bit weird and a bit out there, and
mm,
it was only really, particularly I say during, I mean a bit during secondary school, but coming to like university where I realised like, oh, I am quite different to other people, and I remember sort of encountering this sort of this kind of this loneliness because I wasn't able to sort of find many people where I could have these sort of deep conversations with and stuff like that. And whenever they would go to this sort of like level, there would always be a sort of a kind of social shunning kind of people sort of,
mm,
and then that sort of led to this sort of shame within myself, which I think I've made significant progress in sort of like understanding that and realized and sort of because often when you have that sort of that shame, you sort of feel like, okay, to overcome it, I need to sort of mask who I am and sort of, you
mm,
know, pretend to act in a certain way, perform a certain way to be accepted by other people, and then, but that's a kind of a futile kind of path to go down because you almost feel even more lonely because even if you have people who are sort of accepting this sort of performed version of you, you don't really feel like you still have that belief that my who I am really, when I'm just sort of speaking
mm,
loosely, who I am from the core, you still feel like that version of you isn't kind of lovable, kind of, and and I guess sort of like working through those sort of those limiting beliefs and finding sort of comfort in realizing that you're not alone, that there are many other people who experience these sort of similar issues. Um, that's it's profoundly like comforting and it normalizes it as well, which I think is something
mm,
that I mean I do think that mental illness is being more talked about. I mean more so because it's just especially in sort of my age bracket, it's very highly prevalent, which is concerning, but it's sort of I don't know, it's a kind of reflection of a certain. I think there are certain issues within our general culture. We have a sort of a general culture that is inflict a lot of stress and expectations on people, particularly in like individualistic cultures where you feel
mm,
like you're being measured by how much success you're attaining. Everyone is in this weird career rat race sometimes, and it's I don't think it's sort of a cultural environment that makes very healthy and psychologically balanced people, which is why we have this sort of mental health
mm,
epidemic, which is why we have
mhm,
so many people on antidepressants and whatnot, and like people, and people when they have these sort of mental problems, there's this tendency to blame themselves, and think why
mm,
me, why am I doing this to myself? But often we forget, the the ocean that they're swimming in, and
mhm,
I think that a lot can be said about our sort of educational environments, our social environments, social media, which are sort of creating this this environment which is contributing to sort of mental illness and what and I think as well like you know you you said that you were diagnosed with like bipolar disorder and I think hearing this sort of And yeah, and the description of your sort of spiritual experiences as a kind of a manic episode, I think that is sort of a reflection of how like Western medicine it isn't quite in a state where it's able to properly integrate and understand these sort of spiritual type experiences. You know, there's always that tendency to just label it and then
Hmm.
prescribe that sort of that medicine, and there we've sold it, and it's a very superficial way of sort of thinking about these sorts of things. And yeah, and I sort of yeah I can understand why you sort of took the direction of going to become sort of more of a life coach, a spiritual integration coach. It does sort of give you more flexibility
Hmm.
than the sort of the current sort of counselling in the Western sort of world. But yeah, yeah,
Yeah. So, yeah, I totally agree about like the mental health, mental um, health culture of they kind of they look at the symptoms and then they
mm,
prescribe you a certain thing rather than looking at the root issue. And then you talk hit on it. You know, our society itself is not healthy, so
mm,
maybe these are reasonable symptoms people are having based on the root cause of the experiences they've gone through, and that's the best way they know how to cope. And so it's not that they are sick. It's like we measure sickness on not being able to live well in society the way it is, but society itself is sick, and that's causing people to not live well. So I think that's a great recognition. And again, I want to say that I think therapists are great. I've been to therapy. It's helpful. Um, it's a great point of when people are not doing well, if they need immediate trauma support, or just to really work on their mental and emotional health. And I think like psychotherapy or like Jungian therapy starts to get a little bit more deeper in the psyche and connecting with the spiritual elements. Um, but therapy in general is to get you to this level of baseline health. And I'm not going to say like all therapists, but a lot of times the stigma is that you can only reach this baseline of health, that you always be kind of stuck there. And I totally don't believe in that. And again, I don't think all therapists believe this, but that is a danger if you're in therapy, that you can get that sort of narrative. But coaching is kind of to help people from baseline to like thriving, um and a little more, what are your goals and how can we keep you accountable, and how can we connect you with my type of transformational life coaching, how can we connect you with yourself or your higher self or God or whatever language you want to use, it your own inner coach, how can we teach you that, or help you realize that, it's really asking you questions so you are teaching yourself, so then you can become your own coach and go out and be a confident individual. Anyways, um, you were also talking about loneliness, and you really hit on it, that it's not just about like being alone from other people, it's about alienation from yourself. And even if you conform to try to fit in with other people, that doesn't necessarily solve the loneliness, because you're still alienating yourself from who you really are and really knowing yourself. So the cure for loneliness is to really dive in, who am I and how can I live that out. And I mean, I definitely think that we're made for community, we're made for relationship. And so when we can find other people that can relate, and they hold space and they welcome and they're safe and they're interested in who we really are, then that is really powerful and that's really healing. So it's really great to find that. And so um, uh, the last point I'll make is that talking about how society's sick and how it's wrong, it's really important and special to have people like yourself who embrace being your unique self, because really the average person, quote unquote, is a myth. Everybody's
mm,
unique, everyone's special. And so those who are really fitting society well are the ones who are not being themselves, are not um, able to show their unique selves. And I think that that's a lot of the resistance, they have to people like us, because we're reflecting their deep desire to know themselves and their loneliness and their own shame. And so they're trying to put that away by fitting in with society and be safe that way. But they're really hurting inside. And so we're showing what they really desire. And hopefully they take that step. But
Mm,
we can help change society by being like, look, this is what it's like to be uniquely ourselves. This is what it's like to not just accept what society tells us the way we're supposed to be and the way society's supposed to run. How can we be our unique selves and show a better way and change things and use our imaginations and creativity to create a better future? And so that's so powerful and so needed.
mm, yeah, and yeah, I think I picked up on a few things. Yeah, I think it's creating more of a sort of a culture of sort of unconditional kind of acceptance, like first for yourself and your own sort of personal patterns, your own idiosyncrasies, your own quirks. I think that's something that in my own sort of personal journey that was quite, instrumental for me. And I think as well, like when you're on that sort of that healing process of working through your own patterns, understanding your patterns, and then accepting them in the moment, even if they are sort of you know quote unquote bad or whatnot. I think something to notice is that a lot of our patterns, they are sort of they're deeply they're deep accumulations from history, from our childhood,
Mm,
and
mhm,
so much. I mean, so much of our childhood factors we don't choose, for example, and you know and and it's sort of, I think, relaxing that sort of sense of blameworthiness for how
mhm,
you are in the moment. That's and then creating that space of unconditional kind of acceptance. Where I think meditation and mindfulness, particularly, is sort of a crucial way of sort of integrating that on a sort of an experiential kind of level, where you're sitting there watching your thoughts come up, and then you realize, oh, I'm not actually, these thoughts, they emerge out of this empty spacious field, and I'm actually the thing that is prior to the thoughts and stuff
mhm,
like that. And that's that sort of that unconditioned kind of space. And I feel that when I'm sort of living and sort of speaking from that unconditional kind of space, you do feel like you are speaking from almost from truth, from a sort of
mhm,
an aligned authenticity. And I think as well, like, that it can have like ripple effects almost, because when you're sort of expressing yourself, lots of other people, they'll respond differently to that. Sometimes you can create a sort of a space where they feel comfortable and relaxed to not feel like they're being judged by themselves and whatnot. Sometimes, like you said, the average person, they'll sometimes recoil from that and be creeped out. And but that's their own sort of accumulated sort of maybe the word karma is sort of a good
mhm,
word, or their build up,
mhm,
their development at that point made it so that they feel like there are sort of rigid expectations of behaving in the world, and here's someone who's a bit out there, a bit eccentric, and that's, I don't understand that. That's a bit weird to me. So I'll say something or whatever to shun it or whatever. But that, I think that's, yeah. It's when you are sort of becoming to a point where you are sort of feeling more authentic in yourselves. It's. I think it is sort of reasonable to expect that you'll lose certain friends, maybe you'll also gain certain friendships and stuff like that. But
mhm,
I think that the friendships that you gain when you are sort of coming from a space of sort of authentic, unconditional openness, they're so much more enriching. They're
mhm,
so much more, deeper sort of connection, pretty much. And it's something that you know we live in sort of an age where we are so isolated in our devices, our own sort of like little bubbles, and there is a kind of decline of sort of like community and general
mhm,
activities, which is probably part of like the things that are contributing to our sort of sense of loneliness, sense of alienation, lack of meaning and stuff. I think if we sort of reflect, like, some of my most sort of enjoyable moments was when I'm with other people,
Mhm.
laughing, having fun, enjoying that sort of that moment simply for what it is. I do enjoy like my solitude and my peace, a lot sometimes, but it's not a way. Yeah, for many people, it's like I don't know that. I mean, I remember hearing some statistics on like how many close friends people, particularly my age, have, like particularly like guys, and many of them don't seem to, there does seem to be a decline in that sort of that real sense of community, which
Mhm.
I think, yeah, it saddens me, but I hope there will be sort of a reaction, kind of, when people,
Mhm.
a real, genuine kind of response to, this sort of mental health epidemic, because that, yeah, it simply can't, you can't really ignore it. It's people coming into like my age into the workforce, and they're being productive members of society, but they've got all sorts of issues and stuff that is it's one of those issues which society can't really push under the rug, pretty much.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
I think something else you mentioned about the average person being a myth. It reminded me of this great book by Gabor Mate, which The Myth
Mhm.
of Normal, which
Mm.
is probably where I get some inspiration for some of my ideas. I mean, he works a lot with trauma and addiction. He's written some books about that, and he's also yeah, I got some of my ideas regarding how society does very much puts us in a very stressed kind of state, and I think his sort of work is important in the destigmatization of the individual, and actually looking beyond the individual towards the environment in which they're situated in, and thinking of mental illness, depression, not as something that is blameworthy, but as really sort of a normal and almost adaptive kind of response or reaction to a sick society. So I guess sort of the way that we can sort of address these sorts of stuff, because I mean these social issues, if they can feel so much more bigger than yourselves, and yeah,
Mhm.
they are, but I think we can derive a lot of like meaning and power through you know integrating with our local environments, our local social
Mhm.
groups. First, like thinking about ourselves, my own sort of patterns of shame and trauma. You know, you know, yeah, and this ties into my own sort of interest in the application of psychedelics in the therapeutic modality. I think there's a lot of interesting promise there, and but I think we should always be not too uh, yeah, I'm excited about psychedelics, but I'm also guarded because I can see how
Mhm.
the pitfalls that we had. I mean,
Mhm.
we had it with the '60s and the prohibition that resulted from that. So I think, yeah, I guess sort of all the things that I sort of ratting around in my brain is like,
Mhm.
how do we sort of, you know, heal ourselves and then heal the
Mhm.
world, pretty much, and
Yeah.
I guess, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you're everything you say is spot on. I'm just like
I
with you.
appreciate
I'm like,
that.
yes. I'm like, yes. 100%. That's great. I think couple things. I think as you grow and heal in your journey, you learn to um stop being a victim so much, and blaming the outside world for your problems, for your traumas, for everything, and not that they didn't affect you, and that wasn't wrong committed. I think well, I will say actually the first step is acknowledging that, and acknowledging that you might have anger, you have forgiveness work to do. You have so instead of bypassing that, be like, okay, I just forgive them. Be like, no, my body still hasn't forgiven them, so I can say that with my
Mm,
mind. But how do I work through this in my body? And that's acknowledging these emotions I have and feeling them out. And in doing that, then I can learn to heal that in my body. And yeah, and then once I do that, then be like, okay, how can I take responsibility for my own actions, for my own thoughts, for my own emotions, and have the free will to make these choices instead of just being like, the external world, these people have harmed me, and I'm not in control of anything, and it's just everything's against me.
Mm,
So once we can do that, um, then we start to really go far and take responsibility and take free will, and again, that does start the process of, we heal the world by first healing ourselves. But I do think there are stages of like, you grew up a certain way, these certain beliefs, and then something happens, or maybe it's a slow change. Not everybody has these crazy or amazing, whatever you want to call them, awakenings. Um, and you form this other belief system or this other worldview, or whatever, this other group. And then you're kind of see yourself opposed to the group you go up in, and you're kind of really against them. But then you learn, that there's there's no safe, there's no group that has it all figured out and is all right. You stop thinking so dualistically, and you see that, there's truth in all different, religions or groups or political parties, whatever tribe you want to have, but there's also things that are wrong, and so you learn to um, feel into the energy, and I think learn to, it helped me once I found spiritual friends who I could talk to be like, okay, here are the people that are here for me, that can hold space, that can have these conversations, that doesn't create resistance, and they're interested, and yeah, I can have that here, and I can fully be myself, and it can be great. And so having that need fulfilled in that way, and also continuing to do the work myself, and like, how can I, when I'm by myself, meet my own needs, and entertain these thoughts and whatever. Then when I go out to other people, who are not open to these ideas or beliefs or these conversations, I can be like, I can, what do they need? How can I be there for them the way they are, instead of just being like, how can you meet my needs? And so,
mm,
um, yeah, I'm just fulfilling myself and my needs in these other areas so that I can be fully present and be there for other people and what they need. And yeah, again, that helps collective. And I do agree in the bigger picture that, mental health is becoming a, not taboo anymore. We can talk about it, and we're understanding it more, and we're seeing it more in society. And of course, there's always ditches we go to. There's, younger people, Gen Z is like overdiagnosing, and they like almost like want these
mm,
diagnoses. It's like their own specialness,
yeah,
um,
mm,
and so we have to try to balance the bridge again, and not get stuck in our, just like with personality. It's like, you don't, my view is, you don't just like learn your personality to be like, this is who I am, I'm special. I mean, that's true, but how can I embrace all the different personalities, all the positive things about them, and integrate that instead of getting stuck in this one frame of who I am? If we don't continue to change and grow, then we're going backwards. We're So same thing with like the mental health diagnoses. Uh and so, yeah, I think as we learn what's unhealthy about society and the mental health, then we can continue to go deeper into the spiritual aspect and this oneness perspective of how, what's the common human experience and emotions and thoughts, and how can we all connect beyond our tribes and our perspectives and our beliefs, and how can we come together and create something better that is more harmonious and healthy and helpful, um, as a society. And technology obviously has a lot of issues, but it highlights the things that are going wrong, just like the news. It focuses on the negative, and so, if we get stuck in that, we can be like, oh, the world sucks, the world is a very negative place. But
mm,
another perspective is, we're uncovering, like Carl Jung talks about, the shadow, the unconscious
mm,
shadows. And so when that comes up, then we can deal with it. and then we can heal that and then see the light behind that. So I see the positives behind the negatives with that. And so I have hope that there is this great awakening happening and that the future will be better.
Mm, yeah, I think particularly your last comment about this sort of this rough period being almost the scale of society doing shadow work. It made me think of the the way that social media algorithms work and based on like what they sort of show people and all these sort of these algorithms they're designed to sort of optimize for engagement for showing you
Mm,
what keeps you on the app. So it's almost like this weird almost tool for doing that kind of shadow work because it is sort
hmm
of it's when you're scrolling through your phone you are sort of you're synergizing with this absurdly complex algorithm that is psychoanalyzing you on a deep kind of level. And like we mentioned how with the news, for example, there's always like there's always a bias towards showing sensationalist kind of shocking, potentially polarizing kind of information because that's what stimulates people's limbic systems and gets them engaged. And that like a similar thing happens with like phones where you'll be scrolling through and it'll be always be sort of emotionally arousing content, a lot oftentimes politically polarizing content that
Sensationalism.
yeah that gets you aroused and it keeps you on the app kind of. But
Hmm
when you sort of zoom out and you think, okay, what would happen to a society we introduce this whole new social network where like the media environment is optimizing for this kind of engagement. Like it's quite ordinary that you would see political polarization, this sort of sense of increased tribalism, people you know people scrolling doom scrolling is like a whole thing where you'll be scrolling and just seeing
hmm
bad news after bad news and you think, oh god. and and there's a lot of like almost vicarious trauma that happens through
mm
people's like phones and the social
hmm
media algorithm because you'll be scrolling, you'll be seeing some kind of atrocity going on across the world,
hmm
and it's very
Confirmation
for
bias.
yeah. And I guess sort of like the amount of the internet, the stuff that we can be exposed to is considering how our brains are sort of the normal sort of environment would have been immersed in like 100,000, 200,000 years ago. Like the amount of traumatic stuff that we can be exposed to is,
hmm
quite unprecedented. So
mm
I guess sort of this sort of maybe inspires sort of deeper need for like more mindful technology use, more
hmm
mindful use of algorithms and yeah, I
And I think
mean,
we're seeing that. If I
mm,
could say real quick, like Threads, I'm really impressed
mm,
and enjoying. Threads is a new social media that's connected with Instagram, but it's very simplistic. I don't see anything about like the news. It's not connected with that.
mm,
It's not like a lot of images or videos. It's very simple, very I can just tell that it's easier on my brain and it doesn't put me in this uh, accelerated heart rate or my nervous system isn't aroused or whatever. And then people are very. Anyways, my algorithm is very positive. I'm just seeing a lot of therapists, healers, people sharing their stories and what they've learned. People wanting to connect like this about
mm,
podcasts. I want
mm,
people on podcasts or I want to be on podcasts. Let's network, let's connect, let's talk more deeply. It's very it's to me it's kind of what we're talking about, like, oh, we're seeing all these negative social medias and algorithm and ways to not use it well, and it feeds on negativity. Twitter is very much like that. And
mm,
then Threads is like, okay, how can we correct this? Um how can this be energy of positive that fuels this? And that's what it seems like to me. So and I've heard, I haven't researched it in depth, but like the creators of Threads are trying to do this consciously, and so we're seeing
mm.
that reflected in the app itself, and that's really cool to see.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Like my experience with Threads has been, you know, extremely like refreshing. I mean, like we said, it allowed us to connect like very easily, very quickly, and likewise, like the algorithm doesn't seem to. Yeah, it is sort of registering what engages you, but it's very much a person centered, interaction centered kind of form of social media. It seems like, and yeah, I'm quite optimistic. At least I found it. Yeah, I've had a lot of met a lot of interesting people, lots of interesting conversation, and yeah, hopefully, fingers crossed, it sort of continues to be sort of a social media that is sort of enriching to like social media dynamics rather than technically destructive. And I think it's a natural thing to expect that people will sort of improve upon social medias because I think there's obviously a reason why social media became so popular because we are these social mammals and we're going onto these sort of digital networks and obviously it's connecting loads of different people from everywhere across the globe. So obviously some crazy stuff is going to happen, but it's hopefully when society can sort of rebalance, reach a kind of equilibrium, and we'll see this sort of these social media apps sort of arising, and hopefully for the benefit of humanity in the future. But yeah, we're coming up to the hour mark here, but there's so much more I would like to sort of talk about, but I want to respect your time, and hopefully we'll have like another one of these sometime in the future. But Kendall, would you like to sort of you know, reveal, what sort of where people can find you, your sort of links,
Yeah,
social medias,
yeah.
and whatnot?
Yeah, again, thanks for the opportunity and the conversation. I really enjoyed your questions and your thoughts as well. You totally resonate with everything you say, so I really appreciate that. It's been really great. Um, yeah, again, I'm a spiritual integration and transformational life coach. I know it's a lot of big words there. Big mouthful is what I'm trying to say. But yeah, you can find me on my website. It's www.kendallmccullough.com. I can give Ryan the link. You can put that in the show
Yeah, I'll
notes.
put it down. Of course.
Okay, awesome. Yeah. Yeah, if you want to schedule a free consultation call, see what your needs are, see if we're a good fit, see if I can help you. Love that. I have my own podcast called Becoming Who We Are. I'm sure it aligns a lot with Ryan's own podcast. So yeah, it's great to connect.
Yeah, likewise. It's been a pleasure. I've enjoyed this conversation a lot, like hearing your perspectives, and I mentioned as well, like before recording, like, I've been listening to some of your podcasts, and you have a lot of very interesting people, lots of interesting conversations, and yeah, I'll be keeping up with your next few podcasts as well, and yeah,
Yeah.
I hope we can get to do this again sometime. But
Yeah,
yeah,
for sure. I'd love to. And look forward to also keeping up with your podcast and listening to some episodes. Yeah.
pleasure. Well, it's been great to speak to you, Kendall. I'll
You too.
stop recording now.